John Keats was born in London, England on October 31st, 1795, to Thomas and Frances Keats. He was the oldest among 4 children. Unfortunately, Keats lost both of his parents at a young age. He was only 8 years old when his father, a stable-keeper, was killed after being trampled by a horse. Keats's mother, Frances, was distraught after her husband's death. She quickly remarried and in turn lost most of the family's wealth. After her second marriage collapsed, Frances abandoned the family and left her children with her mother. Eventually, Frances returned to her children, but her life was in pieces, and she died of tuberculosis in 1810, when Keats was just 15 years old. During this dark period in his life, Keats found relief in art and literature. Shortly before his father's death, Keats began his studies at Enfield Academy in London, where he soon became friends with the headmaster's son, Cowden Clarke. Keats's love for literature began as the Clarkes encouraged him to turn his energy towards the school library. During the rest of his time at Enfield, Keats continued studying all genres of literature while also learning French. Sadly, he found it difficult to justify a literary career to his family, and in late 1810, Keats was removed from Enfield and began studying to become a surgeon in a London hospital. He was apprenticed to a renowned surgeon, Thomas Hammond, in a small town near Enfield, Edmonton, where his grandmother lived. However, Keats's medical career never truly took off. Even as he devoted his studies to medicine, his passion for literature never died. As he was living in the small and claustrophobic surgeon's quarters, Keats grew lonely and began to wander the outdoors and travel the short distance to Enfield to visit the Clarkes. It is on these visits where he furthered his reading as he devoured dozens of books that were provided by the Enfield Library. Among these books, Edmund Spenser's Faerie Queene awakened Keats's love of poetry. Keats soon left his apprenticeship to pursue his true passion. He published his first volume, Poems by John Keats, in 1817. Keats continued to publish work, but suffered harsh criticism and negative reviews. He soon returned home to care for his brother, who had tuberculosis. While nursing his brother, Keats met and fell in love with a woman named Fanny Brawne. Some of Keats's finest poetry arose during this period, the time of his brother's death. That same autumn, Keats contracted tuberculosis. As he was nearing death, he continued his work as well as his correspondence with Fanny Brawne. Sadly, due to his illness, he could never marry Fanny. Keats died on February 23, 1821, at the age of 25, and was buried in the Protestant cemetery in Rome. Keats wrote his own epitaph, which describes his belief that he would not be remembered. Here lies one whose name was writ in water.
Romanticism, otherwise known as the intellectual, social, and artistic romantic movement, was very widespread in both its origins and influence. No other movement has had tantamount variety, reach, or lasting influence since that of the end of the Middle Ages. Beginning in Germany and in England in the 1770s, Romanticism was a response to the rationalist ideology of the Enlightenment period and to political and social issues concerning the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. By the 1820s, the Romantic movement had made its way through Europe and soon traveled to the Western Hemisphere. Beginning in the late 18th century, Romanticism had transformed all forms of art: poetry, novels, drama, painting, all types of concert music, and ballet. In its musical form, the Romantic movement had triumphed around the world. The most popular orchestral music in the world is that of the Romantic era. Romanticism also echoed the politics of the time, mirroring people's fears and ambitions. Romanticism also inspired a revolt against the established order and of things such as precise rules, laws, and formulas that were characterized by classicism in the late 1700s. The combination of new interests and new attitudes produced a modern form of literature that was quite different from the literature of the 18th century. Keats, among other poets such as Byron and Shelley, helped to define the Romantic movement through his writing styles and interests. The poet's fondness of nature and humanitarian ideals were pivotal to the Romantic era and helped to inspire later Romantic artists. Though he was never acclaimed during his lifetime, after his death, Keats became known as one of England's greatest poets. Romantic poetry usually reflects a strong appreciation for the power of nature and focuses on the emotional impact of experiences. It also fondly recalls the ideas of the past and appreciates the power of the human imagination. Written soon after his brother's death, Keats' La Belle Dame sans Merci draws on many of these Romantic-era trends.
La Belle Dame sans Merci was first written by Keats in 1819, but wasn't published until 1820. The original poem was found in a letter to Keats's brother George, and was included among many of Keats's other famous works. In his letter, he wrote to his brother that La Belle Dame sans Merci was rushed. Keats largely dismissed this work, but it has since become one of his most celebrated poems. The French title translates to The Beautiful Lady Without Mercy. The poem begins with the speaker who comes across a knight who was wandering alone, staring longingly into the abyss. The speaker questions the knight, and the knight reveals that he discovered a beautiful woman in the woods with whom he fell in love with. The woman lures the knight to follow her, and he is eventually tempted into her cave, where he falls asleep. In his sleep, he sees all the men and knights that the woman has previously seduced, and that they are all dead. The knight then wakes up alone, finding himself abandoned by the woman. Heartbroken, the knight loiters alone, mourning the loss of his love. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, in fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend, and sing a fairy's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept, and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild eyes, with kisses for. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed, on the cold hill's side. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle dame sans merci, hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide. And I awoke and found me here, on the cold hill's side. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing.
The theme of this poem is that love is not infinite, and when lost, it can be devastating to those who are abandoned by the one they love. This theme is most evident through the knight in the poem, as he is abandoned by the beautiful woman who enchanted him. La Belle Dame sans Merci is a literary ballad, a medieval genre revived by the Romantic poet's imitation of a folk ballad. Keats uses a ballad stanza, a quatrain, and alternating iambic tetrameter and trimeter lines. The shortening of the fourth line in each stanza of the poem gives the ballad a deliberate and slower movement that is pleasing to the ear. As Carl Rolson stated, this deceptively simple tale written in ballad style, featuring short lines and romantic longings, evokes the human yearning for an eternal, imperishable love, a bond that outlasts death and conquers mortality.
The rhyme scheme of this poem is ABCB, meaning that within each quatrain, the last syllable in the second line rhymes with that of the fourth line, and the last syllables of the first and third lines stand alone. Keats uses a number of the stylistic characteristics of a ballad, such as the simplicity of language, repetition, and absence of details, and like many Romantic-era ballads, it highlights the supernatural. The ballad opens with the speaker stumbling upon a loitering knight. Keats sets a desolate mood by the longing connotative diction of the loitering knight, early on establishing the theme of abandonment, as a typical description of a knight is a character who acts with purpose and is constantly occupied with brave and daunting tasks. The epithet, woe begone, further indicates the knight's distress. Keats echoes his first and second lines of the poem in the second stanza as the speaker's repetition stresses the ailing of the distraught knight. The first few stanzas are also rich with imagery as the poet draws the natural autumn scene of the lonely moors and the solitary knight in the reader's head. Keats also utilizes elision to contribute to the Renaissance and Old Style language of the poem. The speaker continues to notice the knight's failing health as the metaphors, I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too, allude to the knight's feverish look and lack of color.
The knight now begins to tell the speaker his story of the beautiful woman that he longs for. The knight describes the woman as a fairy, an allusion to exaggerate the woman's beauty and almost supernatural appearance. The knight continues to elaborate on the time he spent with the enchantress, using alliteration and parallel structure to stress the lady's magnificent features. Next, the knight shares his story of his travels to the lady's cave. Here, Keats uses enjambment to continue the rhythm of the poem. As the woman states with a monosyllabic spondee, I love thee true, she brings the knight to her elfin grot, and he falls asleep and enters a dream. Dreams are often discussed in Romantic-era poems, as the human imagination plays a large role in the Romantic movement. In his dream, the knight sees the deathly visions of kings, princes, and warriors, with ghastly figures. They all cry out to him, warning him that the lady has no mercy and that he is in her trap now as well. The imagery employed to describe the dead man contributes to the grotesque surprise of the knight when he sees the death-pale figures of the woman's past. The knight then suddenly awakes, only to find himself alone on a cold hillside, abandoned by his lover. He has been wandering the land ever since, hoping for his lady to return or for death to embrace him. The poem's mostly masculine ending phrases of desolate diction and caesura once again emphasize the knight's alone and palely loitering as the story closes.
Thus, the knight's story ends, and his state of depression and sickness is explained. He has fallen victim to a lover's betrayal and abandonment. But the lady remains still an enigma, both to the poet and the reader. Though on first look, the woman appears to be an attention-seeking lady who mercilessly leads unwary young men to believe that she loves them. But on deeper study, it's found that there's a lot more to her character. Her eyes are sad and wild, her sighs sorrowful, and her gaze mournful. Critics continue to argue about the true intention of the merciless lady in the poem and whether or not there is a deeper meaning to her character. Many critics believe that La Belle Dame sans Merci was parallel to the relationships in Keats's life. As Bloom's literary reference states, La Belle Dame sans Merci is a poem based on two significant relationships in Keats's life, both of which had to do with an impossible love relationship. He was constantly trying to balance his work, illness, and love life, which proved quite taxing on his physical and mental health. It is often thought that Keats is represented by the knight in the poem, as the knight is aimlessly chasing his love as he nears death. Keats is also known among some of his critics to present romance in his poems in an oversimplified way. As Robert Kern stated, Keats's work is known for its unguarded and perhaps naive willingness to embrace a definition of poetry as romance in an exclusive and oversimplified way, a definition that merely exacerbates the otherwise inescapable differences between poetry and life. The art we chose to represent our poem is La Belle Dame sans Merci, a piece that was painted by John William Waterhouse in 1893. The painting depicts a woman ensnaring a knight in the forest, drawing him towards her with her hair. The knight, totally enraptured by her beauty, stares into her eyes hopelessly. The piece was inspired by Keats's poem, La Belle Dame sans Merci, and the story of a woman using her beauty to entrap men is a common theme depicted in many Victorian paintings.
The music we chose to represent La Belle Dame sans Merci is Symphonie Fantastique, written by the French composer Hector Berlioz and premiered in Paris in 1830. The symphony, inspired by Berlioz's obsession over his love, Harriet, parallels the story of the knight in La Belle Dame sans Merci. Through its movements, Berlioz tells the story of an artist's self-destructive passion for a beautiful woman. The piece consists of 5 movements, but we chose to use only the first 3. The first movement, Rêveries, or Passions, tells the story of the first time the artist sees a woman of his dreams and how he falls madly in love with her. The second movement, Un Bal, represents the artist going to a ball where he continues to be haunted by the sight of his beloved and tries desperately to win her attention. Lastly, the third movement, Scene en Champs, or Scene in the Fields, moves the listeners to a countryside where the artist is finally tranquil, but suddenly the woman appears again, plunging the artist into sorrowful loneliness.